Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the novel The Good Doctor, written by Juno Dawson. I have also got the audiobook read by Claire Corbett. We've previously talked about her. She previously did an audiobook with Matt Smith. I believe it's The Hounds of Amaranth. It's very strange that she was put as the first person to read a Doctor Who novel for an audiobook. But I got the audiobook and I had it with the book, so I've had a much more immersive experience than I have with most of my Doctor Who novels. So this should be interesting. By the way, the audiobook is 5 discs long. I don't know if it's a normal thing for audiobooks. This is the first time I actually read one with the audiobook, unabridged as well. This is an unabridged version of it. And I think it works a lot better. I think from now on, when I get the books, I will get the audiobooks to accompany it. This is the first novel to feature the 13th Doctor of sorts. There were actually cameo appearances from the 13th Doctor there's a novel, like a book of poetry by, I believe it's Russell T Davies, and in it implied that the 13th Doctor is one of the characters, and it's a woman, and she's also an assassin at one point. That's very strange. But this is the first feature-length novel, even though it was written mostly prior to I believe it was written prior to the casting of Jodie Whittaker, and after all the announcements and stuff to change the script of sorts, they were allowed to have character bios for each character of Ryan, Graham, Yaz, and obviously the 13th Doctor, as well as, I believe, the script for the first episode. So Juno Dawson had a great concept of the script and the initial ideas of Doctor Who. I actually got these. Well, the reason I got these novels to begin with is that I was interested because I've heard a lot of people who have read these and disliked Series 11. Actually liked these novels, the 3 novels that were released in 2018. I believe they were 2018. It could be 2019. I could be wrong. And yeah, that kind of caught my eye. But also as well is that usually when I hear stuff like this, what I'm thinking about, what people are usually considering is the political side of it, whether these stories are consciously making a political story. And what I find really captivating about these novels, the first 3 anyway, is that people seem to really enjoy them. People even who dislike Series 11 seem to really enjoy these books. But these books do not shy away from the political allegories that Series 11 was mainly focused on, with a lot of focus on prejudice and, that kind of political ideology that the stories try and show in a more realistic and a much more grounded look into the narratives, and the stories are usually based around them. A great example, of course, is Rosa, and other stories in Series 11, which we'll get talking about later. But they've always had a concept of politically focused narratives in Series 11. So that kind of really caught my eye. Juno Dawson has written for, I think Juno Dawson was the one who wrote for Doctor Who, Big Finish dramas, and this is her first I don't know if this is her first novel, but this is the first 13th, one of the more modern Doctors that she's done. So that's really cool and really interesting. But yeah, so before I get on to beginning, most of the time when I talk about a novel or an audio drama, a lot of people always ask me usually, is it immersive? Can you read this and picture it being like an episode of Doctor Who with the 13th Doctor, Yaz, Ryan, and Graham? Does the story flow in a way where you can imagine it being in that kind of style? I'm gonna separate this element into two parts. We'll talk about the audio book later on in the video, but for the book, I'd say absolutely. It has much more vibes of a 60s, specifically the first Doctor, specifically the first era with him, Susan, Ian and Barbara, where it's much more of an ensemble task and the story splits our characters up, but nobody has ever gets like a main focus per se, though characters do have prominent roles throughout the stories, as we'll talk about later. But it has that wideness of those 60 stories, which I felt really fitted the 13th Doctor. I think I've stated this in my videos prior, but if I haven't, I feel like Chris Chibnall's era, at least his early stuff with Series 11, is a homage to that 60s, where you do have a big assembled cast like this, and they are... Nobody's really... It's not like a relationship where the Doctor is a hierarchy and the companions are the lower down, even though that is obviously still the case. But in terms of the focus of the narrative, the story treats them as essentially equals. And I really like this approach to Doctor Who, and I think Doctor Who should do it more often. And that is in this novel. Again, it is a bit different when we're talking about the audiobook, which I will get onto later. But for now, let's talk about the story. Now, the story is actually... I'm going to summarize the story for a bit. Because what the story does is really interesting, and it's something which Doctor Who has the capability of doing lots, but rarely does. In fact, the story reminds me a bit of The Face of Evil, the fourth Doctor story, which introduced my favourite companion, Leela. Essentially, at the start of the story, we actually conclude a narrative that we don't actually see. On the planet Lobos, there is a war between two factions. The humans who colonized, who came to this planet of Loba as a colony ship, and they were only like 100, but they expanded and they've grown, and there's this massive war that came out, and these creatures called Loba are the species, Lobos is the planet. And these Lobos are actually, listen to this, humanoid dog people. That's really strange to consider when you know about the future of the rest of the series for the 13th Doctor's era. That's pretty, notch. In this story, essentially we see the Doctor summarise this piece in a really great Doctor moment where, one of the leaders, I can't remember their names, is about the leader of the Loba, Loba, I can't remember, Lobos? No, Loba is the species. Where the Loba woman, she's going to shoot down the human leader, and the Doctor's just like, look around you. Oh, look, it's just damage. It's just junk. And then she picks up like a teddy bear, and it's like, that used to belong to someone, but now they're probably dead. And it picks up like a frame, and it's like, and somebody's mug, and it's just like, these things used to belong to people. They used to have meaning. Like, so that mug might have been someone's favourite mug. But now, thanks to this war, thanks to you people just messing everything up, that mug doesn't really matter. And this war is just for the sakes of it. So, just, kill each other. It's fine. I don't care. But just, the ramifications. But all this destruction, all this ruin, this death, misery is all on you. And the story quickly wraps up that little element with Ryan at one point. Ryan and Yaz are on this. They're on a radio station, and Ryan's using his phone to transmit this message all over Lobos so that the message gets everywhere. However, Ryan accidentally leaves his phone on the planet of Loba, and when they go back into the TARDIS, it's only then does Ryan realise. I forgot to mention, before they leave, they get a photo with Graham, because Graham's just a lovely lad, and one of the last things he said is, dog is a man's best friend, and, like a cheerful manner, as a quite little, quirky moment, which, it's perfectly Graham. That has, huge ramifications throughout the rest of the story. As they go into the TARDIS, the triumph dematerializes, and then Ryan realizes he's forgotten his phone. So the Doctor transports them back. And the Doctor Ryan go out to back onto Loba sorry, there's a fly there, Lobos, and realizes that a lot of things have changed. Most noticeably is this giant church-like building that's shaped and looks resembling the TARDIS, or as the people of it around call it, the TORDIS. As you see, this is actually set 6,000 years into the future, and essentially what's happened is a peace treaty between the humans and the Loba. It's basically been distorted, deteriorated, and there is this another war between this religious factor that believe in the good Doctor and the world of the TORDIS, and they have this like hell-bent religion based around the good Doctor. And then there's these rebels, these people, both human and Loba alike, have teamed up to basically go up against this religious church-like entity. As the TARDIS team go around and explore this new version of Lobos, do they realize that this church has basically distorted their message? They believe in their religious hearts that the humans are superior to the Lobas, and they've basically enslaved them with these chains. They also believe the good Doctor, is a man. Because there was this deadly plague, and the religious basically believed, distorted it so that it is put on the blame of women. And there's a lot of ideologies like that. Like, for example, in this church, women aren't allowed in the church. In fact, at the start of the story, Yaz actually becomes a prisoner of this church, as she is seen outside the TARDIS without anybody, as she's hiding Graham in case she needs rescuing later. And these robotic creatures known as the Eyes, which are like the security guards of this culture, they basically state that one of the holy laws is that women aren't allowed outside the premises of the city without their husbands or guardian or fathers and stuff like that. And you can hear right off the bat that there's a lot of political allegory there, and there's a lot of focus on that kind of story where it's about suppression, it's about humane. And what I really like about this story is that it takes that idea. Is something which, like in sci-fi, is something which has been done to death loads of times. Doctor Who has done it loads of times. But the story likes to take its time. You get to learn about this religion. You get to learn it in a way which is both sometimes dramatically serious, where the Doctor and Graham and Ryan and Yaz are absolutely disgusted, absolute disgust at what this religion is doing. But there's also some great fun moments. For example, the good Doctor, as I've stated before, isn't a woman. It's not the Doctor as we know it. The church has been based around Graham. Bragley Walsh is a god in this story. That is the greatest concept. I like to imagine that, like, they were like, the BBC books are just like, right, we need ideas for a Doctor Who novel. And then Judy Lawson is like, what if Bragley Walsh is a giant church dedicated to Bragley Walsh? And they were just like, there you go, you've got there you go, you've got the contract, you make that book. There's so much great. What I really loved about the story is that with any other writer, they would have used that as like a joke, and throughout most of the story would use that as a joke. And though, yeah, there are some funny moments, especially when the Doctor and Ryan, they see this in the cathedral. This, actually, I think that's the image, although I think in the book it describes it as his arms open to resemble the picture that was saved in their first travels in the stained glass. And Ryan's just like, oh my god, they've like based a religion on Graham. There's worst people to base a religion upon, even though they think he's actually the Doctor. And when Graham realizes, is absolutely stultified, as well as when basically the religion basically believe he's the Doctor, and Graham is so out of his element. He's such a normal bloke that, like, the humour is up there. But the story actually takes it a lot deeper than that. For example, like, in terms of just structure, the story actually does something really interesting where, because Graham's the one which is essentially the Doctor and essentially everybody's listening towards, the Doctor kind of gets a break from being essentially the leader of the... Not the leader, but like the one that gets to tell everyone what to do. She kind of can come back and kind of does her, like, not spying, but can see things from the shadows, shall we say. She can kind of see this religion from the outskirts. As well, the Doctor's gender being a massive part of the story, which is something which I think a lot of people, when Series 11 came out and Jodie Whittaker was cast, was something that a lot of people, like, really didn't want of. I remember when the Series 11 was being, like, announced and stuff, a lot of people, I might have said, like, at the time, myself included, were like, I really hope, like, the story just glasses over the fact that she's a woman. So the story just goes, oh yeah, I'm a woman now. And then, like, the story just continue. And for most of Series 11, they do that. However, I do feel like there is a missed opportunity of the Doctor's gender, especially in, like, historicals and in, like, stories like this, where that could be a really interesting new dynamic the Doctor Who's never tackled before, where the Doctor just being in a certain mode, in this case, being a female, just automatically puts her out of authority. And even though she can just demand a presence, just stands there and just tells anybody what they need to do when the time comes, it's just a very interesting dynamic. As well as just, like, the story uses this to get Graham close to a character called McEdam. His name is McEdam, who's kind of like the priest of this religion. And we essentially, throughout the story, spoiler alert, I suppose, he becomes the main villain as he gets more and more cautious. He becomes more and more aware that something's not right here. But throughout half the story, probably like halfway through the book, that happens. The majority of the story, he basically does believe that Graham is the Great Doctor, and Ryan, Yaz, and the Doctor are, like, his disciples, or like his guardian angels of sorts. And so this brings, like, a really interesting dynamic where throughout the story we all spend a lot of time with this villain that's exclusive to the story, and it just brings a great dynamic into the narrative. The TARDIS team do get split up a lot, with Ryan teaming up with this other character called Tempika, who is this monk who seems to have a informant into the rebels, who we later learn he's like a spy of sorts. Yaz, though, firstly gets imprisoned and meets up with two characters, one called Pry and one called Tomos. But however, quickly gets broken out by the rebels, and she basically becomes the rebel side of the story. Now, Yaz is a character which, throughout Series 11, is a character that I don't think is as interesting as she should have been. Her police background doesn't really play into the television stories that much in Series 11. And here, I was kind of hoping that would be in a forefront. And though it does get a mention, there are scenes where it's like, they mention it, but it's like, oh my god, this conveniently all of her training went out the window. I hate it when stories do that. But however, one other thing about Yaz that really annoys me in Series 11 is that usually when you have a big TARDIS team like this, especially when you have to consider like the 5th Doctor and the 1st Doctor, usually to try and get around the fact that, you know, there's so many main characters, is that one character will be used as sort of the questioning companion, the one that goes around asking people's questions and getting other characters, especially the supporting cast in this particular story, to relay information about the world and their characters. And Yaz has been, in Series 11, mainly the character that does that, and really doesn't get a time to shine in Series 11, in my opinion. and I was hoping that she would hear. She does take on that typical role of hers in the television series. In here, she does ask a lot of questions, and she doesn't really have any prominence where she is the fully supportive character per se. I mean, she does have scenes, but majority of the story she is taking a question. However, because she is mostly separated from the TARDIS team, she is the rebellion's point of view. And whilst the Doctor, Graham, and Ryan, throughout the most of the story, are learning about this religion, it's Yaz that learns about the rebellion, learns about Pry and his people and how the slavery works and the culture and how they plan to basically destroy the temple, not regardless of who's in it or not, or whether they hurt anybody, even including themselves. And the characters our team basically slowly realizes that basically one side of the war is maybe not as bad, but just as thirsty for blood, shall we say, as the other. And so it's up to the Doctor basically and the team to basically come up with a plan to come together. One of my favourite scenes in this story, essentially after McEdam realizes that, Graham isn't actually a godlike entity, which again, the fact that he was so fooled for so long was so funny, but he has such a great presence as well. McEdam just surprisingly has like a really strangely great presence in this story. But one of my favourite scenes is basically they've been building up this Tomos character who he's a Loba who was not mutated, but like given like steroids and stuff by humans, and is basically deformed to be this ultimate like warrior thing. But like he's in constant pain, but is also seemingly like gone mad and everybody has like fear of him, and essentially to try and prove that the Doctor, the real Doctor, is in fact in the light of the good Doctor, shall we say. McEdam organizes a competition, a tournament to the death between the Doctor and Tournemus, and the Doctor, though gets offered weapons, refuses them and basically talks him out of a fight. It's very doctorly. It's very well executed. Juno Dawson absolutely nails this scene. And then they get bombarded by like an ambush by the rebels, and in the story, and that's basically where we come into the final act, which I won't go much into detail as it goes into like the rest of the story. But I really enjoyed this novel. I had a lot of fun with it. Now, before we go, I want to talk about the audiobook that I got. This is like the first time I've actually like listened to an audiobook like this, where it came as a novel. I have talked about audiobooks before on the Doctor Who Marathon, but this is the first time where it was like a novel and an unabridged 5-disc version. And first off, Claire Corbett does a fantastic job at reading it. She gives so much personality to it. Her impression of the 13th Doctor is spot on. I don't think she captures Ryan that particularly well. When I hear her, I don't hear Toshin Coyle. Like her impression of Graham is so funny, but it's not Bragley Walsh. But she's just like reading the story as if like the narrator. She's not supposed to be like an actress in terms of like portraying these characters. She's the narrator of the story. But in any sense, she does a great job here at dealing with the dialogue. But in terms of submersiveness, this audiobook does some really strange things. The one thing that took me by surprise, the Doctor Who theme song's not on it. That, like, Sega, so I guess they didn't have the right for Sega Nakanola. There is music on the disc, which I couldn't find out. I wonder if it's like, watch this now, it'll be on the back now. No, I can't see it. But the music in this, I couldn't find a credit to the music, but it was very like 70s. there's a lot of 70s Doctor Who sounds in there, which kind of took me out a bit in terms of it being a 13th Doctor. It very felt like a Doctor Who audiobook, but like the 13th Doctor has a particular sound, the Sagan Akinola of the music, but this was very 70s. This was John Pertwee, Tom Baker sounding, maybe mid Fourth Doctor sounding story. It was very odd to listen to. And one of the things about the music as well is that it repeats a lot of the same music, and I don't think the music fits the scenes quite well. There'll be a scene where there'll be a scene where like the scene is tensing up and there's a lot of action. There's a as is described in a novel, like explosions and gas. But there's kind of this like ambient music, which would be great for like characters talking about like an ominous thing that's happening, which does happen, and that music does play, but it plays like throughout the story. There's about like 3 to 4 songs in this that get repeated repeatedly, and not all of them fit throughout the scenes, and it was kind of distracting, and it did kind of take me out. However, the benefits of having actually someone, somebody with dyslexia, reading the story and doing a fantastic job, and having that music that may not put me in a 13th Doctor mood, did put me really in a Doctor Who mood. It's really strange to say. So I think the benefits of having an audiobook outweigh the issues that I had with it as of the moment. Maybe as I get used to the format of doing this, when I read the book and the audiobook, maybe that will become more prominent if I ever get more which are better at representing the error and stuff. But here, that's just something I know. I personally prefer reading it with the audiobook. However, I can understand if somebody would like listen to this and be like, this is not a good audiobook. But like Claire Carbett does a great job here at reading the story, which again, I found it really strange how she was picked, especially when you learned later down the line that in the 3 audiobooks that came with the 3 novels, one of them was actually read by Mandip Gill, and she wasn't picked to do the first one. In fact, because Graham was like the main, I'm surprised they didn't get Bragley Walsh or Toshin Coyle to do it. It was very strange. It was very, very odd. But anyway, that's The Good Doctor. Overall, had a really great blast with you. This is a very great novel. Highly recommended. It is very politically heavy story, which really goes into the depths of the 13th Doctor era, where it talks about prejudice, and it talks about like gender and race to an extent. In this case, it's more species than race. And like slavery and stuff is a big part of the story, so that might put some people off. However, the story is really captivating. It flies by. The villain is great. The world building here is phenomenal. The ideas that are played up here are very great. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that line where before Graham left, where the dog is a man's best friend. The religion used that as a basis to use the Loba, the dog-like race, to be slaves. Careless words cost lives, Graham. God damn you. Maybe Graham's like the main villain of the story. Who knows? But yeah, good Doctor, a good book. Highly recommended by me. So anyway, that is The Good Doctor. So join me next time when the Doctor goes from, I guess, one story about slavery to another. Not slavery, but like race and prejudice and stuff, as the Doctor finds herself getting a request from Yasmin Khan to go back to the 1940s or 50s. I can't remember when that story is set. As an alien race seems to mysteriously been looking around and seemingly seem to assassinate creatures. So join me next time for the Demons of the Punjab. And I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-ra!